There's something hauntingly beautiful about the way ancient Egyptians viewed death. To them, it wasn't an end. It was the beginning of something greater, a transition, a voyage through sacred thresholds into the afterlife. And they didn't take that trip lightly. Step inside a tomb, and you're not just walking through stone corridors. You're walking into someone's hopes, their fears, their plan for forever. Somewhere beneath layers of sand and time, pharaohs were laid to rest surrounded by everything they thought they'd need on the other side. Jewels, gold, food, oils, even handwritten spells, carefully tucked beside their bodies like cosmic boarding passes. These weren't just graves, they were time capsules, snapshots of belief and power. In King Tutankhamun's tomb, archaeologists uncovered 36 sealed jars filled with ancient wine. Nearby, baskets of fruit, perfectly preserved. Why? Because they believed the journey to the afterlife wasn't just long, it was epic. So naturally you'd need provisions, travel snacks, just of a divine sort. And fashion? Oh, they took that with them too. Tunics, scarves, headdresses, gloves, all laid out in preparation for the journey beyond. Gold bracelets, precious pendants, rings carved with sacred symbols, even golden beetles worn for protection. They thought of everything, even keeping cool. Handcrafted fans made from ivory and ostrich feathers. Ever wonder how a pharaoh planned to travel through the underworld? For some, it was by ship, like Pharaoh Khufu, who built the Great Pyramid at Giza, his tomb. Inside, a full-size solar boat was discovered, perfectly disassembled like ancient IKEA. Meanwhile, King Tut, no boat, but he was buried with finely crafted paddles, 3 chariots, and dozens of ornate walking sticks. Looks like he planned to travel by land, royally of course. Even board games made the cut. Yes, real ones. Carved from ivory or gold. One of the most popular, a game called Senet. Think of it as the great-great-grandparent of chess. The idea, if you could win in life, maybe you'd win in death too. Now, Egypt may be the most famous when it comes to mummies, but they didn't start the trend. The very first known mummification practices come from South America, an ancient civilization called the Chinchorro, who were preserving their loved ones 2,000 years before the Egyptians started wrapping up royals. Still, Egypt perfected it into an art form and a spiritual practice. For the longest time, we could only guess what these people look like in life. But then something extraordinary turned up. Portraits, actual painted portraits. Found on wooden panels placed over mummified faces, these stunning images show men and women with piercing eyes, detailed jewelry, and lifelike expressions, painted before they passed and placed with their bodies after. Some even show signs of illness that researchers could match to the physical remains. These weren't just decorations, they were echoes of real lives. And recently, a new batch of these ancient portraits was uncovered in Central Egypt, the first such find in over 100 years. Not all mummies were made by human hands. Sometimes nature handles the preservation herself. Extreme heat, bone-dry air, or freezing cold can slow decay to a crawl. Take Ötzi the Iceman, for example. He was found in the Alps in 1991, so perfectly preserved that authorities thought he was a modern-day mountaineer. Turns out he lived over 5,000 years ago, during the Copper Age. Picture this, it's nighttime, and you're deep beneath the sands, flashlight flickering. You followed a crumbling map into Pharaoh Tutankhamun's tomb. Hieroglyphs glare at you from the walls. One reads, "Those who take from this place shall never rest again." Spooky, right? Now, if you've seen enough movies, you probably expect a trap door to swing open, a boulder to crash down, or a swarm of snakes to slither from the shadows. Truth is, those dramatic Hollywood-style traps, mostly fiction. Ancient civilizations weren't building Indiana Jones sets, but they were clever. They used confusion as a weapon. Fake chambers, false doors, maze-like passageways, and hidden pits meant to trick and trap tomb raiders. Let's take Amenhotep III's resting place. Buried deep within the Valley of the Kings, his tomb was designed like a fortress of deception. Over 10 rooms, long corridors, dead ends, and a single secret chamber hidden in the heart of it all. Some pharaohs even built vertical shafts, 20 feet deep, right behind decoy doors. Imagine taking one wrong step in the dark. Other tricks included walls that led nowhere and symbols meant to disorient or terrify. And then there were the spells, inked warnings of fire, flood, and misfortune for those who dared disturb the dead. In 1922, when British archaeologist Howard Carter finally cracked open King Tut's tomb, the world lost its mind. And not just because of the gold, it was what happened after. Within months of the discovery, several people connected to the excavation died unexpectedly, mysteriously, some from illness, one from a mosquito bite gone wrong, another from pneumonia. The press jumped on it, spinning tales of a pharaoh's curse awakening from its 3,000-year slumber. Even Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the guy who created Sherlock Holmes, claimed it was all the work of elemental forces. But here's the twist. Statistically, the people who entered the tomb weren't dying at an unusual rate. In fact, many of them lived long, healthy lives. One lived into his 90s. So was there really a curse? Probably not. But ancient Egyptians did inscribe warnings, threats even, on some tombs. Not for drama, for protection. Their belief in the afterlife was so deep, so woven into everything they did, that disturbing the dead wasn't just theft, it was cosmic sabotage. Let's talk about one of the more unsettling finds. In the ancient city of Avaris, once the bustling capital of the Hyksos dynasty, archaeologists uncovered several pits filled with dismembered right hands. Just the right ones. No bodies, no context. Just hands placed deliberately in front of what may have been a palace throne. Why? The theory? It was a gruesome reward system. Warriors would cut off the hands of defeated enemies and present them to the king, both as proof of victory and as a way to claim gold or status. Brutal, symbolic, and oddly organized. You've probably heard about mummified cats in Egypt, maybe seen one in a museum, but cats were just the beginning. Over the years, archaeologists have uncovered mummified falcons, dogs, ibises, crocodiles, and even baboons. Why? Because many of these animals were seen as messengers or embodiments of the gods. Take Anubis, the jackal-headed god of the afterlife, or Bastet, the cat goddess, or Thoth, the wise and moon-loving deity, often represented by a baboon or ibis. In some temples, animals were bred specifically for sacrifice and mummification, kind of like ancient spiritual offerings. But not all of these creatures were treated kindly. In one case, researchers examined the bones of mummified baboons and found signs of extreme vitamin D deficiency, suggesting they were kept indoors, deprived of sunlight, and poorly fed. Sacred or not, life wasn't exactly golden for these divine animals. Egyptians believed that speech carried power, not just in life, but in death. So what do you do if you want to talk your way into the afterlife? You give someone a golden tongue. Literally. Archaeologists in recent years have uncovered several mummies buried with golden tongues placed carefully inside their mouths. The idea that this enchanted tongue would help the soul speak before Osiris, the god who judged the dead, and maybe, just maybe, talk their way into paradise. Some of these mummies were found in wooden coffins, surrounded by items that sound like the contents of a pharaoh's wish list. Amulets shaped like scarab beetles, lotus flowers, fine pottery, and gold jewelry. iPhones? Okay, not quite. But hey, those scarabs were probably the ancient version of a passport, power bank, and Lucky Charm all in one. Now here's where things get a little mythological. While digging in Egypt's Sinai Peninsula, researchers stumbled upon two massive pink granite columns sticking up from the earth like ancient fingers reaching for the sky. Those columns, they were once part of a temple believed to be dedicated to Zeus Cassios, a fascinating fusion between Zeus, the Greek god of thunder, and Mount Cassios, a sacred mountain in ancient Syrian mythology. It's one of those wild moments where cultures collide. Greek meets Egyptian meets local legend. The temple had collapsed, probably during an earthquake, and had been buried ever since. But even in ruin, its presence is unmistakable, a reminder that ancient Egypt wasn't a closed world. It was a crossroads of belief, trade, power, and influence. Amid all these gods of judgment, storms, and death, there was also Bes, short, round, and almost always grinning, Bes was the deity of joy, music, dance, and protection, especially during childbirth. Recently, a golden ring surfaced south of Cairo bearing Bes's image, and while he may look like a chubby little dwarf who got lost on his way to a party, Bes was a fierce protector, especially of women and children. And get this, in ancient times, some women would get tattoos of Bes on their lower backs. Why? To guard them during childbirth. These weren't decorative ink jobs, they were deeply spiritual, physical shields worn in the most vulnerable moments. And since human skin doesn't preserve well over millennia, finding these tattoos was an extraordinary discovery, like ancient whispers finally making it through the ages. All right, brace yourself. This one's wild. At the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, a wooden statue had been sitting quietly in its glass case for years. Just another relic, nothing unusual, until someone decided to x-ray it. What they found, a secret mechanism. Inside the statue was a hidden system of pulleys and levers, carefully crafted to move the statue's arm up and down. When activated, it would raise its hand, like a student eager to answer a question. Was it a spiritual automaton, a ritual puppet, a clever bit of engineering to animate the divine? Maybe all of the above. Call it what you want, this thing was the ancient world's version of a robot, which just goes to show, never underestimate a civilization that could build pyramids without bulldozers. When you think of mummies, your mind probably jumps straight to kings, queens, golden masks, elaborate tombs, the works. But not everyone in ancient Egypt was royalty. In fact, archaeologists recently uncovered something unexpected. An enormous burial ground with over 1,700 mummies. And here's the twist. None of them were pharaohs. These were everyday people, merchants, farmers, artisans, common folk who lived during a time when Egypt was under Roman and later Byzantine rule about 1,500 years ago. It's called the Cemetery of the Way of the Water Buffalo. Yeah, that name alone raises questions, right? But the deeper story is about a shift in how we understand Egypt's past. Because it wasn't just kings who got mummified. This cemetery shows that even ordinary people were wrapped and buried with care, suggesting the afterlife wasn't just reserved for the elite, it belonged to everyone. Sound familiar? That's because it's right next door to the famous Valley of the Kings. But instead of pharaohs and queens, the Valley of the Monkeys held something else entirely, mummified baboons. Yep, you heard that right. In the early 20th century, archaeologists stumbled across an entire site filled with preserved primates. And these weren't pets or circus animals. They were sacred. To the ancient Egyptians, baboons were associated with Thoth, the deity of wisdom, writing, and the moon. You could say they were kind of like spiritual scribes with fur, but not everything about these mummified creatures tells a noble tale. Modern studies on their remains reveal something sad. The baboons had severe vitamin D deficiencies and signs of poor nutrition. They were likely kept indoors, away from sunlight, fed an unnatural diet, treated more like tools for worship than living beings. It's a reminder that sacred status didn't always mean a better life. Imagine this, you die, and when you arrive at the gates of the afterlife, you can't speak. That was a real fear for ancient Egyptians. So in a bid to prepare the dead, they sometimes placed tongues made of gold in the mouths of the deceased. It was their version of a passport, a golden voice for the soul, so it could speak to the gods in the next world. Some of these golden-tongued mummies were buried in beautifully painted wooden coffins, surrounded by treasures, jewelry, pottery, delicate lotus-shaped ornaments, beetle-shaped amulets. They believed every item had meaning, a purpose, a role to play in what came next. Even the placement of the body mattered, because for them, death wasn't the end. It was just the start of a much longer journey. In the rocky sands of the Sinai Peninsula, two pink granite columns once poked through the dirt, barely visible. But beneath them, a temple long buried by time and earthquakes. Experts believe it was dedicated to Zeus Cassios, a fusion god combining Zeus, the Greek god of thunder, and Cassios, a mountain deity from the eastern Mediterranean. This was during a time when Greek and Egyptian cultures were blending, overlapping, and influencing each other in fascinating ways. Imagine it, a temple to a hybrid god where the thunder of Olympus met the mysticism of Egypt. And those pink columns, they likely marked the grand entrance, toppled centuries ago during a violent tremor. Now, unearthed once more, they stand as ancient witnesses to a world that didn't just collide, it merged. Not all gods in ancient Egypt were distant, fearsome beings draped in cosmic symbolism. Some were, well, fun. Bes was one of them. Small in stature, round in the belly, wild hair, and a face that looked more like a party crasher than a holy figure. But don't be fooled. Bes was a force of protection, especially for women and children. He was the god of joy, music, dancing, and, most importantly, childbirth. So when archaeologists found a gold ring near Cairo engraved with his image, they weren't surprised. What did surprise them? Ancient tattoos of Bes, inked on women's lower backs, discovered on well-preserved mummies near the Nile. These tattoos weren't fashion statements. They were spiritual armor. They meant, protect me, keep me safe when I bring life into this world. Today, tattoos are often about identity or style, but back then, they were sacred, protective, symbolic. It's amazing how ink can carry so much across thousands of years. At the Metropolitan Museum of Art, among thousands of relics, there was a wooden statue that looked, on the surface, pretty ordinary until someone decided to scan it. X-rays revealed something wild, a mechanical system hidden inside the statue's body. A primitive but ingenious setup of pulleys and levers connecting the statue's shoulder to its leg. What did it do? When activated, the statue raised its hand, as if signaling, praying, or greeting. Think about that. Thousands of years before electricity, before robots, before modern mechanics, someone designed a functional, moving figure. It wasn't just spiritual, it was interactive. Maybe it was used in ceremonies. Maybe it was a form of storytelling. Maybe it was meant to show that even the gods themselves could move through this world. Whatever the reason, it's proof that innovation doesn't belong to any one era. They were dreaming big long before us. Imagine walking through a bustling city, markets alive with color, temples echoing with prayers, boats gliding across the harbor. Then, one day, it's all gone. That's what happened to Thonis Heraclean and Canopus, two thriving cities along Egypt's northern coast that just disappeared. For centuries, they were thought to be legend, whispered about in ancient texts, but lost to time, until divers stumbled across them in the early 2000s. Hidden beneath the waters of the Mediterranean Sea, these sunken cities lay preserved like a forgotten time capsule. Statues, jewelry, columns, coins, all still intact. What brought them down? Earthquakes, rising sea levels, soil liquefaction where solid ground suddenly turns to quicksand. Nature swallowed them whole, but what's most haunting is how well they've endured, silently waiting under the sea for over 1,000 years, like the gods were keeping a secret until we were ready to listen. When we picture Egyptian mummies, we imagine careful rituals, sacred traditions passed down over generations. But not every mummy was made equal. Some were actually fakes. Yeah. Turns out that by the late period of ancient Egypt, the demand for mummification had skyrocketed, and with it, a kind of spiritual shortcut culture. Certain embalmers started cutting corners, stuffing bodies with sawdust, skipping purification steps, and even wrapping incomplete remains. In some cases, they didn't even mummify a body at all, just a bundle of wrappings made to look like a mummy, and people bought it, literally. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. Many of the materials used in mummification, resins, oils, perfumes, were the same ingredients used in ancient Egyptian cosmetics, eye makeup, skin salves, scented oils, what they used to honor the dead. They also used to beautify the living. There was no hard line between science and spirituality, between medicine and makeup. Everything was part of the same worldview, one where body, soul, and symbol were deeply intertwined. Have you ever noticed those iconic eyes on ancient Egyptian art? Almond-shaped, outlined in rich blacks and greens, so striking, so unforgettable. That's not just fashion. They believed the eye, especially the eye of Horus, was a symbol of protection, health, and power. And those bold lines, they weren't just for show. They were made from a mineral called coal, blended with galena, a type of lead, and malachite, a green copper mineral. And recent studies suggest these eye paints may have had antibacterial properties, protecting people from eye infections in the harsh desert climate. So in a way, it was medicine disguised as makeup. They didn't separate aesthetics from function. To them, beauty had purpose, and purpose had power. We often hear about the Library of Alexandria, that legendary archive of ancient knowledge lost to fire and conquest. But Egypt's obsession with recording information, that goes way beyond books, temples, tombs, monuments. Nearly every surface was carved with symbols and text. These weren't just decorative, they were a permanent record of laws, prayers, events, even medical treatments. In some temples, entire walls were devoted to surgical procedures, how to treat wounds, deliver babies, set bones, all written out in hieroglyphs. They believed knowledge shouldn't be hidden away on shelves. It should be engraved into the world, visible, lasting, eternal. And in a way, it worked, because we're still reading those walls today. To the ancient Egyptians, death wasn't something to fear. It was something to prepare for. Every tool, every ritual, every symbol had a role in what came next. Their burial process was meticulous. The heart was left inside the body for judgment, the brain removed. They believed it didn't matter in the afterlife. The Book of the Dead wasn't a single book. It was a collection of spells and instructions, a literal manual for how to navigate the afterlife, like a cosmic GPS, and all of it was designed for one goal: to pass the final test, the weighing of the heart. If your heart was light, you entered paradise. If it was heavy with wrongdoing, you were devoured by a creature named Ammit, part lion, part hippo, part crocodile. Harsh, maybe, but it showed something powerful. They believed your actions mattered, that what you did in this life would echo into the next. You've seen the photos, the Great Pyramid rising from the sand like it's defying time itself. But here's the wild part. We still don't know everything that's inside it. In 2017, scientists used something called muon radiography, basically particle imaging, to peek inside without damaging the structure. And what did they find? A hidden void, a huge space, roughly the size of a commercial jet, tucked away deep within the Great Pyramid of Giza. No one's ever stepped inside it. No one knows what it was for. A secret chamber sealed away for 4,500 years and counting. Makes you wonder, right? What else have they left us to discover? Let's talk about the building itself. Each block in the Great Pyramid weighs on average about 2.5 tons. Some weigh as much as 80 tons. And yet they're cut and placed with a level of precision that modern machines would struggle to replicate. How did they do it? Well, forget the alien theories. The real answer is even more impressive: mathematics and manpower. They understood geometry. They tracked the stars. They aligned entire structures to true north with barely a whisper of deviation. All this with copper tools, sleds, and sheer human will. It wasn't magic, it was genius. Ancient Egyptians weren't just builders, they were astronomers. They watched the skies obsessively, noting how the stars shifted through the seasons, and they used that knowledge to guide their lives and their architecture. Take the Temple of Abu Simbel. Twice a year, on February 22nd and October 22nd, the morning sun shines directly into the temple's inner chamber, lighting up statues of three gods. Except for one, Ta, the god of the underworld, who stays in shadow. They designed it that way, on purpose. It's a cosmic clock, built from stone and sunlight. Proof that ancient people weren't guessing, they knew. Now here's a part of Egyptian history that doesn't get nearly enough attention: the women who ruled. We all know Cleopatra, right? But she wasn't the first, not by a long shot. Before her came women like Hatshepsut, a powerful ruler who reigned for over 2 decades. She wore the false beard of a pharaoh, commanded armies, and expanded Egypt's trade empire. Or Sobekneferu, who ruled during the 12th dynasty. Her name means the beauty of the crocodile, and she was one of the first women to rule Egypt as a fully recognized pharaoh. These women weren't just figureheads, they had real power, and they held their own in a world dominated by men. For centuries, no one could read ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. The language had faded, buried along with the civilization that wrote it. And then in 1799, a single stone changed everything: the Rosetta Stone. It had the same message written in 3 languages: Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphs. That discovery gave scholars the key they needed to crack the code. It took over 20 years to decode it, but when they finally did, Egypt came back to life. Texts that had been silent for millennia began to speak again. Rituals, stories, scientific treatises, all of it opened up word by word, like turning the lights back on in a room you didn't know you'd lost. There's something haunting about how much the ancient Egyptians still speak to us. Through stone, through myth, through the things they left behind. They didn't just live, they planned for eternity. And in a strange way, maybe they got it. Because here we are, thousands of years later, still asking questions, still listening, still wondering what they knew, what they saw, that we're just beginning to understand. Not all mummies were pharaohs or high priests. In fact, a massive burial site uncovered in the Fayum region revealed over 1,700 mummies, and none of them belonged to royalty. These were ordinary people, everyday lives preserved in the desert. They lived during Egypt's later years under the rule of the Roman and Byzantine empires around 1,500 years ago. The mummification was simpler. No golden masks, no grand sarcophagi, just linen, earth, and reverence. And the cemetery, it had a curious name, the Way of the Water Buffalo. Strange, right? But it reminds us that even in death, the ancient Egyptians believed in the power of a journey, a path, a continuation. Here's where things get a little unexpected. In the early 1900s, archaeologists stumbled upon something unusual in a place called, wait for it, the Valley of the Monkeys. Inside, dozens of mummified baboons. That's not something you see every day. But in ancient Egypt, animals weren't just pets or symbols. They were considered divine messengers, each one tied to a god or goddess. Jackals were linked to Anubis, the god of the afterlife. Cats represented Bastet, the fierce protector. And baboons, they were connected to Thoth, the deity of wisdom, writing, and knowledge, an advisor to the sun god, Ra. But here's the darker truth. When scientists studied these baboon remains, they noticed something troubling. Their bones showed signs of vitamin D deficiency, meaning they were probably kept indoors, away from sunlight, and underfed. They were sacred, but they also suffered. And that contrast between honor and neglect says a lot about how complicated these ancient relationships with animals really were. As if things weren't surreal enough, in recent years, archaeologists have found several mummies buried with golden tongues placed inside their mouths. Yes, actual tongues made of gold. Why? Well, ancient Egyptians believed in preparing the dead for the afterlife. Speaking was essential, especially when facing judgment before the gods. The golden tongue was a kind of afterlife insurance, a way to ensure the deceased could still speak on the other side. Talk about speaking volumes, even in death. Among the sands of the Sinai Peninsula, 2 pink granite columns were spotted poking out of the earth. At first glance, they just looked like broken pillars, but dig a little deeper, literally, and what they found was something far more interesting, a lost temple. This wasn't just any temple. It was likely built to honor a deity named Zeus Cassios, a fusion of the Greek god Zeus and Mount Cassios, a sacred peak tied to the heavens. This blending of Greek and Egyptian beliefs wasn't rare during the later dynasties. As empires collided, their gods did too, and Egypt absorbed them all, reshaping their temples to reflect both the local and the foreign. It's like a spiritual mosaic carved in stone. Not all Egyptian gods were stern or terrifying. Some, believe it or not, were joyful. Meet Bes, a jolly dwarf-like deity often shown with a wide smile and wild hair. Bes was the god of music, dance, and fun, but also childbirth and protection. He was loved by everyday Egyptians, especially women and children. And recently, in a city just south of Cairo, archaeologists found a gold ring engraved with Bes's face. It wasn't just jewelry, it was a charm, something worn to keep bad spirits away and invite joy instead. And speaking of protection, let's talk tattoos. In the Nile region, mummified women were discovered with inked symbols on their lower backs. Simple designs, lines, dots, and figures, but incredibly rare, since human skin barely survives the centuries. Some of those tattoos, depictions of Bes himself. Scholars believe these weren't just decorative. They were protective spells, inked onto the body to guard both mother and child during childbirth. In a world filled with danger and uncertainty, they used art to shield life. Now let's get weird for a moment. In the Metropolitan Museum of Art, a wooden Egyptian statue stood quietly for years. It was labeled as a religious artifact, just another statue. But then scientists x-rayed it, and inside they found a mechanical system. Yeah, a pulley mechanism. One that, when activated, allowed the statue's arm to rise and fall. No wires, no motors, just brilliant design, ancient engineering with a touch of drama. This automated deity may have been used in rituals, its movement controlled from behind a curtain, giving worshippers the illusion of a living goddess responding to prayers. So no, it wasn't a robot in the sci-fi sense, but still kind of close, right? Imagine this. You're standing in the middle of the desert. The sun is blazing. Sand stretches endlessly in every direction. And then someone tells you there used to be a city right beneath your feet. It's hard to believe, but it's true. All across Egypt, entire towns have been swallowed by sandstorms, floods, and the passage of centuries. Lost not to war or destruction, but simply to time. One of the most stunning examples, Heracleion, an ancient port city that once stood proudly near the mouth of the Nile. It was a bustling hub of trade and spirituality, filled with colossal temples, statues, and markets. But then, it vanished. For over 1,000 years, no one knew where it had gone. People assumed it was just a myth, a legend told and retold. Until in the early 2000s, underwater archaeologists discovered its ruins, submerged beneath the Mediterranean Sea. Stone statues taller than humans, entire temples resting on the ocean floor, gold coins, sunken ships, and bronze anchors frozen in time. It's as if the city just sank quietly into the water and waited to be found. And it's not alone. Other cities like Canopus and Thonis have also reappeared after centuries in hiding. Some were covered by rising sea levels, others by shifting earth and Nile floods. But they're all coming back now, slowly, piece by piece. It's eerie, it's beautiful, and it reminds us the past isn't gone. It's just waiting for us to look in the right place. Egypt didn't just build pyramids and tombs, it built legacies. Its stories, its gods, art, architecture, and science traveled far beyond the Nile. You can see its fingerprints all over Greece, Rome, even as far as Persia and India. Obelisks that once marked sacred spots in Egypt now stand proudly in European capitals. Philosophers like Plato and Pythagoras were inspired by Egyptian thought, and the Eye of Horus, you'll find versions of that symbol in cultures halfway across the world. Even in our modern language and fashion, bits of Egypt linger. That fascination never left. What began in the heat of the desert found its way into the DNA of civilizations everywhere. For a long time, exploring Egypt meant pickaxes, notebooks, and sand-covered boots. Now, it's satellites, AI, 3D scanning, thermal imaging. Today's archaeologists don't just dig, they decode. They can now detect buried structures without even touching the ground. They can recreate ancient buildings in virtual reality. They're uncovering long-lost tombs using heat signatures from space. It's like giving history a second chance to tell its story, using the tools of tomorrow. And guess what? It's working. Just in the past decade, these technologies have led to the discovery of hidden chambers inside pyramids, secret passageways in tombs, and forgotten cities under layers of silt and stone. There's no telling what's still out there, but one thing's for sure, we've only scratched the surface. Here's the thing about Egypt. No matter how much we find, it still keeps secrets. And maybe that's the beauty of it. It's not just about gold mass or hieroglyphics. It's about curiosity, about connection, about looking back so we can understand who we are today. Every artifact, every mummy, every crumbling statue, it's a whisper from the past. A reminder that people once lived, laughed, feared, loved, just like we do. And now, with the help of modern science, we're finally able to hear them. Not loudly, but clearly enough. We talk about pyramids and pharaohs. We marvel at gold masks and forgotten tombs. But underneath all of it, there's something more. The ancient Egyptians didn't just live for today, they lived for forever. They built with eternity in mind, not just bricks and stone, but in spirit too. Every temple, every carving, every sacred rite was a message. We were here, we mattered, and maybe so will you. They knew life was fragile. They knew it could end in a blink, but instead of fearing it, they prepared for it, celebrated it, honored it, not just in grand monuments, but in the tiniest details. The placement of a charm, the shape of a hieroglyph, the care in preserving someone's body for the next world. It wasn't about death, it was about hope. Thousands of years later, we're still captivated, still searching, still asking questions. And maybe it's because deep down we want the same things they did. We want to be remembered. We want to leave something behind that lasts. We want to believe that what we do, what we love, what we build, who we are, doesn't just disappear. So when we stand in front of a pyramid or read the story on a temple wall or look into the face of a perfectly preserved mummy, we're not just looking at history, we're looking at a mirror. Because their world, it's not so different from ours. The sand might have buried their cities. The years might have stolen their names, but somehow they're still speaking to us in symbols, in ruins, in echoes. And every time we discover something new, every time we lift the veil just a little more, it's like they're whispering, "You're part of this too. Keep going." So next time you hear someone mention ancient Egypt, maybe it's in a documentary or a textbook or a museum plaque, pause for a second and remember what's really behind it all. Not just gods and kings, not just myths and mummies, but people. People who dreamed, who wondered, who reached for the stars and carved those dreams into stone, hoping someone would find them one day. And now that someone is you.